Hey everyone, this video going to be about Cisco Router Boot process. Here I will discuss about how router boots up when you turn on the router. Additionally, I will explain about modes. This is not about Cisco iOS command mode which we discussed in previous video. Here we will discuss about mode that router can boot to when you turn on the router. Third, we will study about stages such as post, bootstrap, startup and loaded. Fourth, we will study about components. If you see inside the router or switch, physically you can see certain components such as ROM, flash, Nvram and RAM. So these components we will discuss in this video tutorial. Finally, we will finish it off with configuration register values in detail. Before we learn router booting process in detail, let's familiar with components inside the router. As you can see, this is one of the Cisco 2600 router motherboard picture with internal components detail. So let's follow up each components one by one. ROM, it's read-only memory which is available on the motherboard of the device. ROM stores 4 components: post, Bootstrap Program, ROMMON Mode and mini iOS. Each one of these individual ROM chip components also we will discuss in the same video. Second component, flash. It's a permanent memory, which means data is stored in flash, not lost when you turn off the router. Router or switch uses flash to store iOS image. Third component, Nvram, non-volatile random access memory. It's also a permanent memory. Fourth one, RAM. It's a temporary memory, which means when you turn off the router, everything in RAM is erased. RAM is the fastest memory among these memories. And fifth, configuration file. There are two set of configuration file where one is known as running configuration and other one known as startup configuration. And keep in mind, configuration file and configuration register value not same, both are two different things. So let's discuss each individual components inside the ROM chip. The first one, post, power on shelf test. It is a program, it is hard coded in the ROM chip and also run from ROM. It performs various tests on hardware components and it will verify that all necessary components are present and functional. At the same time, it will detect any hardware changes such as removing or installing new components in the router. Second components inside the ROM chip called Bootstrap. It's also a program which is hard coded in the ROM chip. Bootstrap program responsible for bringing up the router and finding iOS on all possible location and loading it in the RAM. So what are those locations we will study soon. Third component, ROMMON. It's a portable iOS program and it will be used for password recovery mechanism. It has its own mode. You can call this as ROMMON Mode. Router can get to this mode in two scenarios. First, manual. The second one, automatic. Manually you will go to this mode in case if you forgot the console or enable password in your router. So what is console password, what is enable password, we already covered in previous video. So if you don't see the previous video, then you can click the annotation mark in the video and you can get to that video as well, right? In first method, you forcefully let the router to get into the ROMMON mode by using certain keys in the keyboard. So when you turn on the router, in first 60 seconds of boot sequence, you have to press the Ctrl plus C key combination. Once you press this key, automatically the router can get to ROMMON mode. The second method, automatic, as we discussed earlier, Bootstrap program, it is responsible for finding valid iOS from all possible location. In case if it failed to find a valid iOS, then automatically router can get to this ROMMON mode. In manual method, you have to power off the router, then power on again, then router will reboot. or you can provide reload command in privilege exit mode. Next, mini iOS. It contains a stripped down version of iOS. It is used in critical situation where router cannot find iOS image in flash. Normally mini iOS contain only IP code. That way it allows you to load iOS from other resources such as TFTP server. Also you can call this one as RXBoot mode. Now you might have a question, what is the difference between RXBoot and Ramon mode? In newer Cisco devices, it can be router or switch, you will find only Ramon mode, which include the functionality of RXBoot mode. Next, flash. It is a permanent memory. What does it mean? Data is stored in flash, not lost when you turn off the router. Also you can assume flash as hard disk of a router, like data is stored in a hard disk remain safe, same as data is stored in flash remain safe. Router uses flash to store iOS image. Also it will be known as EEPROM. EEPROM stands for erasable programmable read-only memory. During boot process, router loads iOS from flash to RAM. You can provide show flash or dir flash command in order to view the existing files and directories inside the flash. Next, Nvram. Nvram, it's another permanent memory. Data stored in Nvram also remain safe. Router or switch uses Nvram to store configuration files. Most of the newer routers use flash technology for their Nvram purpose, which means Nvram is part of flash memory. You can take as an example Cisco 3750 switches, Cisco 2960 switches. RAM, random access memory, as we discussed earlier, it is temporary memory, which means when you turn off the router, everything from the RAM will be erased. And also we discussed it is the fastest memory among all the memory in the router motherboard. RAM do the following functionality also. During boot process, iOS is copied and decompressed in RAM from flash. The second function, same as iOS, configuration also will be copied from Nvram to RAM. Third, it is used to hold packet buffers, ARP cache, routing table, and etc. The next, configuration file. There are two set of configuration file as we discussed earlier. One is startup configuration file, other one is running configuration file. Running configuration is stored in RAM. Startup configuration is stored in Nvram. When we make any change on Cisco device, it can be router or switch, that change applies to running configuration only. Let's say you change the device name, that change remains in RAM only until you save the configuration. However, if the device is reloaded for whatever the reason, all your changes will be lost as they are not in the startup configuration. Okay, next, configuration register value. It's a 16-bit number and represented in hexadecimal format. Configuration register value instructs the Bootstrap program that where to find iOS and configuration file. By using show version command, you can view the existing configuration register value, and also you can change the existing value by using config-register command. So in the picture there are a variety of configuration register value you can see. The first value, that is the default value, 0x2102. It tells the device to load the iOS from flash to RAM, as well as configuration file from Nvram to RAM. The second one, 0x2100, this value let the router to forcefully get into the Ramon mode. New routers always boot into Ramon mode in case if it cannot find a valid iOS in flash. Third configuration register value, 0x2101. Once you set 0x2101, then you are forcefully let the router to boot into the RXBoot mode. Normally you will use this configuration register value in all routers such as Cisco 1600 and 2500 series router. So those routers has RXBoot mode. In newer Cisco devices you will use a Ramon mode. Later Cisco added all features of the RXBoot iOS to the ROMMON Mode iOS, so newer routers do not need or do not have RXBoot iOS. The fourth configuration register value 0x2142. As we discussed earlier, startup configuration file of router will be in Nvram including password configuration. In case if you forgot router password such as line console or enable, as password recovery mechanism, you can use configuration register value of 0x2142. Once you set, then router will ignore the configuration file from Nvram and proceed without configuration. That way you can get to router console as we get to new router without configuration. So far we learned about components and stages that involves in router booting process. Now it is very simple and easy to understand the order of default router boot process. Once you turn on the router, first thing first, router will do power on shelf test. In this stage, router will check all hardware components exist in router. Once it is success, then Bootstrap program will be loaded and executed from ROM. It is similar to BIOS in a PC. Once Bootstrap loaded, then Bootstrap program look into the Nvram for the configuration register value and it will read it. Based on that value, router will decide how router boots up. And you know, if the configuration register value is 0x2102, which is the default, then Bootstrap program instruct to look for an iOS from flash, and if it found, then iOS will be decompressed and loaded from flash to RAM. In case if you have multiple iOS in flash memory, then Bootstrap program will select an iOS preferred by boot system command and load it into the RAM. Once iOS is loaded from flash to RAM, then iOS will look for the configuration file from Nvram. If the configuration file found, then that configuration file will be loaded from Nvram to RAM. If configuration file not found, then router will end up in setup mode. Suppose Bootstrap didn't find any of the valid iOS from flash, then it will look into the TFTP server. If there is, then iOS will be loaded from TFTP server to RAM. In case if TFTP server cannot be conducted, then router will end up getting into Ramon mode. And you know what is Ramon mode? It is a stripped down version of iOS loaded from ROM to RAM. In this mini iOS, very few commands are working. This is what default router boot processing order as per default configuration register value. Let's assume you set configuration register value as 0x2100. Then forcefully you are letting the router for getting into Ramon mode. In this manual process, router will not look into flash or Nvram for iOS and configuration file. Also, you can set configuration register value as 0x2142. In this scenario, router will not look into the configuration file from Nvram only. However, iOS will be loaded without configurations. Normally, you will use this configuration register value for the password recovery purpose. So that's all for this video. In the next video, I will explain this through the demonstration. Every week you will get new videos, so please consider subscribing my YouTube channel and press the bell button, that way you don't miss any of my upcoming videos.